can sort of go to him and say, remember, we all agree that this book is simply not true.
Steve Schmidt, there's our friend Matt Miller tweeted something that seemed to me to get at the heart of why this book matters. He tweeted, the rivalry and dysfunction inside Team Trump has always been Mueller's biggest asset. If they can't even maintain a united front for a book, just think what a special counsel with full investigative and prosecutorial powers is able to do. You and I worked in a White House and on three presidential campaigns that were fodder for many books. Bob Woodward wrote 3 books about the people we worked for. Many books were written about Sarah Palin. You and I came out well in some of them, terribly in others. But what never happened was a fundamental sort of flipping on the principle. And if you think about Scott McClellan, he was my closest, he was sort of the example that was given to me by a couple of folks inside the Trump White House. The difference in my mind is that nothing is sacred for this team. And when you read through page after page of Michael Wolff's retelling and even of the note about how this book came to be, things that were shared off the record, which is usually a tactic that people like all of us deploy to sort of shed light, it was weaponized. And this was a team of people, this is still a team of people very much at war with one another.
Absolutely. Whether it's Omarosa, whether it's this newest feud in this reality TV show that's the West Wing of the White House, we see the utterly shambolic nature of Donald Trump's management style, the personalities of people who have positions of power around an office where life and death decisions are made. And today, my question would be, who's representing America today? We have a situation where the president is engaged in digital McCarthyism with his implications of the intelligence community as part of some conspiracy, the deep state. We have revolution on the streets in Iran. We have his nuclear blustering with regard to North Korea, his antagonism towards another nuclear power, Pakistan. The world is boiling. The president continues his assault on fundamental institutions of the government. And, of course, we're all distracted today by the never-ending soap opera of the quality of characters that surround this man in the Oval Office at a dangerous hour in the country. And so we see so many things through this, not the least of which is the damage and the distraction caused by this president's thin skin, by his narcissism, and, frankly, by the freak show of people that he's assembled around the Oval Office.
Elise Jordan, to pick up on Steve's thread, I guess as a former West Wing staffer, we had the highest level of security clearances. We dealt with a president who was constantly under attack. George W. Bush had very low approval ratings because the things that he'd done were difficult and among a lot of people, among a lot of Democrats, very unpopular. But never did the West Wing staff turn on him or one another. I cannot imagine, I cannot come up with an analogy in the Bush era to the sort of politics of personal destruction among one another. And I cannot adequately articulate, and many of the conversations were off the record, but the reaction today, not one person called me and said, Donald Trump deserves better, he should fire everyone. Not one person. And the staffer in me sort of fumed at what Steve's saying. Who's looking out for the country?
Well, in Donald Trump, no one has loyalty to him. Even those who are closest to him at the end of the day have no loyalty. And I think back to the George W. Bush White House, and even in the darkest days of, Patrick Fitzgerald and the leak investigation, at the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, everyone was so loyal to the mission, to the man, to the cause, to service. And there wasn't this backbiting going on where literally knives are pulled out at the Trump White House for everyone. And that's something that's captured in this book, too, about how so many of these top advisors demean the president on a regular basis. It's like, well, if you really do think that he's a moron, if you think he's unfit, if you think he's unhinged and crazy, why are you working for him and attaching your reputation to him?
And Joel, some of the more serious allegations in here, it doesn't matter what Sarah Huckabee Sanders says about them. She calls it a fiction, but it doesn't matter because just about everybody in here will be asked to testify under oath with the risk of jail time or prosecution of perjury if they lie. So while they may or may not have lied to Michael Wolff, I have no way of knowing right now. If they lied to Bob Mueller, they'll go to jail. So let me go through some of what's in Michael Wolff's book about Russia. Here's a piece about Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn had been told by friends that it had not been a good idea to take $45,000 from the Russians for a speech. Well, it would only be a problem if we won, he assured them, knowing that it would not be a problem. You start at the beginning of this book, and there's a scene about Kellyanne Conway trying to line up a job for herself in television, which was something I had heard secondhand at the time.
All of us did.
Right. So I wonder if you can sort of take us back in time. You were on the other side. You were both on the other side. You thought you were going to win. But imagine the inverse of that, knowing these folks thought they knew that they were going to lose. And so they did things like take $45,000 for the Russians for a speech that would only be a problem if we won. They are acknowledging to Michael Wolff that having won, it's certainly a problem to have been paid by the Russians.
Look, everybody knew that. They thought they were going to lose. They were talking openly about it with journalists, people like yourselves, colleagues,
well, we were
colleagues.
all here in the green room. Everyone's phones were blowing up from the expectations game.
And so what you have here is a ship that is run aground long ago, right? This lack of loyalty is going to play out over the next few days in a way that is going to affirm, I think, a lot of what's said in the book. People are going to talk about this now. They're going to validate it. You're not going to have a lot of people in that White House backing up Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They're going to be backing up themselves and covering their own tails because this is not a president who's ever made any of these people feel like they matter. He's treated them like he treated Bannon. This was a man he put in the White House as his chief strategist. Think about that. That's on a par with people like Karl Rove, David Axelrod, people who actually were chief strategists, right? So to now denigrate him, he's just, you know, he goes into today without a lot of credibility with the American public broadly. He's going to come out of it with a lot less, and it's going to be compounded, I believe, in the next few days by the people who are quoted blindly in that book who will continue to talk about this.
Let me get into a little bit more of what's in this book about the Russia investigation. So Trump legal spokesman Mark Corallo, seeing no good outcome and privately confiding that he believed the meeting on Air Force One represented a likely obstruction of justice, quit. The Javanka side would put out that Mark Corallo was fired. This is an excerpt that is at the heart of the obstruction of justice investigation being conducted on a parallel track to the investigation into whether or not there was collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia. And this seems to me that, you know, again, we have no way of knowing if what Michael Wolff writes is the truth, but we know, it is a known that Bob Mueller knows whether or not that is true. And that seems like a damning piece of information in both the timeline and the fact pattern about that cover story that was told from aboard Air Force One.
Absolutely, and Jared and Ivanka also were on the fire Comey side of that debate that was going on in the White House, where Bannon was on the other side. So it's clear that Jared and Ivanka were behind some of these more problematic decisions in terms of the legal exposure for the president because they're amateurs. They don't know in terms of what decision-making when you're in public service you can do and what you cannot do because they didn't consult the appropriate lawyers to figure out what they can and cannot do, and they have no idea because they've never done it before. So I think that when you look at the timeline, certainly in terms of the June 9th meeting and then lying to the public after creating this statement at Air Force One, that to me seems like a consciousness of guilt. There's a reason why you're lying. There's a reason why Papadopoulos lied. There's a reason why Michael Flynn lied. Why did they lie and what did they lie about? And I think when you're looking at all of these things put together, it's the fact that Trump knew about what was going on behind the scenes with